This is the Lew Rockwell Show.
Well, it's a great honor to have as our guest today Dr. Ron Paul. Ron Paul, who for more than 30 years has been teaching Americans the truths about international peace, about free markets, about sound money, about sound banking, about the Constitution, about the kind of country that this originally was and maybe could be again if we would listen to him. But today, Ron, among other things, is the prophet of this panic and this crash. It was Ron Paul who has been saying for many years exactly what the Fannie and Freddie operation would bring about, has been talking about the Federal Reserve, about all the bailouts. And now, Ron, I hope all the other congressmen, and I hope Ben Bernanke is calling you up and saying, what should we do?
Not yet. Some days I wish some of these things didn't come to pass, because yesterday I was on one of the interview shows and they asked me, does it look like this is the end? And unfortunately, I told them they were doing the wrong things and they're prolonging the agony. It's going to last longer. So I sort of hope I'm wrong on that, but that's sort of my immediate assessment of what's going on today.
Ron, it seems like Bush and Bernanke and the rest of them have looked at what Hoover and Roosevelt did in the last Great Depression and are just copying them. As you say, we had the boom, the bust is inevitable, but what they're doing is everything wrong. I mean, it's almost like they're setting out to prolong and deepen this crisis.
Absolutely. And one of the significant books that I've read over the years in understanding the Depression was, of course, Murray's book on the Great Depression, and how everything they did was wrong and it prolonged it. And I often thought about, the mistakes that they made, how much we've suffered for all these years by them at that time blaming capitalism and the gold standard for the problem. And unless that is refuted, we're going to continue. I think we're doing a pretty good job, and with your institute, everybody's doing much better in their learning. But so far, the policymakers up here still are unaware of it, and they're going to make many of the same mistakes. But I think hopefully we're in a transition where people are starting to think of other options. And if this thing gets totally out of control, which is a great possibility, it might present an opportunity for us. Of course, it's a very risky business. But in the meantime, we have to convert as many people as possible to understand that doing the same thing that Hoover and Roosevelt did won't answer our problems today.
Ron, certainly all during your campaign, you educated millions of Americans about the money system, and I was struck at your rally for the Republic in Minnesota during your speech, before you even brought up the money system, that you had all the many thousands of people in the audience start to chant, "End the Fed, end the Fed."
It actually turned out to be a light moment for me because, I hadn't even got to him, and I was kidding him. I haven't even gotten to that part yet. But that to me is really amazing, and I wouldn't have predicted it, and I doubt if you'd have predicted it, that these young people would be so intensely interested. But they are aware of it. But it proves the point that education is of a great value, because they have heard of these views, they have heard of the Mises Institute, and they have been exposed. So this to me is progress. And the big question is do we have enough time to have a transition that is nonviolent, or are we going to have a breakdown of our civil structure and domestically have serious problems? But the one good thing that will come of all this, I think our empire has to end, because we're paying our debts right now, and it's not a very smooth transition. And once the dollar's under an attack, I think they're going to realize that we can't maintain our empire around the world. So that'll be a blessing, although it's going to be a tough one to accept.
Well, it seems like the crisis has made an attack on Iran or a bigger attack on Pakistan more difficult. So maybe that is a silver lining in this crisis.
Yeah, and I think if they're honest with themselves about what happened in Georgia, if we had been stupidly in NATO and felt, just to cover ourselves, that we had to go in, we really weren't capable of doing it. Our troops are so engaged, and yet they never seem to want to back off. I mean, right now they're threatening Iran as well as Pakistan, already in occupying two other Muslim countries.
Ron, here the American people are being impoverished to an extent we can't entirely tell by the Federal Reserve, by fractional reserve banking, by the Treasury, and yet, so far as I can tell, you were the only official in Washington, the only spokesman nationally to say, there's something wrong with giving $1 billion in foreign aid to this puppet Saakashvili in Georgia.
Yeah, and I wasn't alone on that. I got to give credit to some others, and there were some Democrats and some Republicans that stood up against it. But this whole idea, that we're going to send humanitarian aid over there, and within it, the bill itself, it mentions that it has to deal with the international pipeline. They use those words in the bill, so they don't even hide from it. And yet there were some of the anti-war people that I was so sad because they voted for it, but they were bought into this is humanitarian aid. And I tried to make the point, that even if it is purely sent for humanitarian aid, all money in a country like this is fungible. So we give them food, they take their money, and they rebuild their weaponry. And we'll be glad, and other countries will be glad to sell them their weapons so they're back at it again. It's so clear. It sort of reminds me of Smedley Butler. It's a racket, and our forces are used merely to be there to train people and to finance the protection of an oil company's pipeline. And it's not strictly an American pipeline. It's an international pipeline, and BP is, one of the major owners of that. So here we are using our kids and our money, bankrupting our country to go over there, train an army, and precipitate the confrontation, renew the Cold War, and at the same time think nothing of another $1 billion, no big deal.
Ron, with them creating untold billions of dollars in new money to bail out all these various institutions, I guess maybe, is it up to $1 trillion so far? I don't know. Are we risking hyperinflation, or is the amount of assets that are being extinguished in all these bankruptcies enough to prevent that? What's your guess?
That debate's been going on a long time, even within the hard money camp. Even in the 70s, they argued there'll be deflation, there will be inflation. I think of it as being both. There is deflation of credit and debt. I mean, there's less debt in the system now, and there's less credit available. So in that loose definition, there has been some deflation. But I don't see any statistics yet of deflation or shrinking of the money supply. Matter of fact, I just looked yesterday at John Williams' report on M3, and it hasn't changed, even with the injection of all this credit. But that still might be early to be reflected there. So in 2 or 3 or 4 months, we might look and see what M3 is doing. But I'm betting on the inflation, because everything that every solution up here that they offer is more spending, more appropriation, more credit, and Fed buying up the world. I mean, where do they get this? They had, $85 billion for AIG? Somebody said, well, where do they get the money? I said, out of thin air. So that ultimately has to be inflation. So even with the shrinkage of some of this debt and credit that's in the system, there's still a lot of dollars slushing around out there, and we've had a free ride for several decades. So I look at it like those dollars that have been created off and on, or steadily since 1971, still haven't been totally discounted. And the final discount of those dollars will be probably an overreaction. They won't make the a calculation and say, well, there were so many dollars, now we shrunk it 30%, and now we'll shrink prices, something like that. People will panic, and prices are going up. Food prices are going up. I don't believe for a minute that we're going to see $2 a gallon gasoline again. So prices, even with the fluctuation of prices of oil overseas, I think we're going to see steady erosion of the value of the dollar, which means inflation, and there is the possibility of the panic. We're close to the panic now, but it seems like the President's Working Group on Financial Markets probably are very, very busy. We have a down day of 500. Maybe the natural consequence would have been the next day going down 2,000 or 3,000, but I think it's quite possible that they could get in the market and sort of settle things down. And I've had some people before the committee that either were Federal Reserve Board members or former members, and they would ask them about the weakening of the dollar, and they would never express, a concern that a weak dollar is bad. Oh, yeah, a weak dollar is okay as long as it's orderly. That's the word they use, orderly. So if you can destroy value orderly and just make people get poorer a little slower, then it's okay. It's morally acceptable. So I think this is what's happening in the market. They're working very, very hard overtime to try to make the decline orderly, but quite frankly, markets are too powerful. They'll eventually not be able to control it, just as they've never been able to control the price of gold forever, and evidently they couldn't do it the other day when gold soared in price. So the markets will rule eventually.
Ron, the thing that made you decide to dedicate your life to the cause of liberty and to trying to teach the American people about sound economics was Richard Nixon's imposition of price and wage controls on August 15, 1971, which I must say I remember as being a traumatizing event as well. Do you think that we're with the McCain, and I remember that hilarious time you asked him about the plunge protection team, and he didn't know what you were talking about. So with either McCain or Obama as president, or maybe under Bush, do we face again the threat of price and wage controls?
Well, I think we always do. In a way, we have them in a small way. They're always trying to fix the price of and the interest rates. That's their whole job to do that. And then this sentiment sits out there. If there's a shortage of something and you charge too much, you're a gouger. So there's a lot of sympathy for that. So yes, I do think it will come back. I don't think we're on the verge of it, but it's a possibility. And of course, that would make things that much worse.
Ron, you're known as quite properly as the champion of the Constitution. Here we have an institution, the Federal Reserve, that's clearly unconstitutional. Yet even within that framework, I found it slightly shocking that the Fed could decide on its own say-so to nationalize a huge American company and take it over. Is this a new step up in tyranny as well as economic insanity?
I think it was a major step. The whole last month has been major, but this idea that you can nationalize a company this size and not even confer with the Congress. Congress is irrelevant. I was thinking about going down on the floor and giving a speech. Why don't we just go home? What's our purpose here? I mean, there's a little bit of a pretense about the executive branch telling us what the CIA is doing. Not much, but they have this pretense of going to the Intelligence Committee under certain circumstances. Oh, yeah, there's a national emergency, and we're going to go off and invade this country, but we'll notify the small select group who are handpicked, of course, on the committee. They don't even go through the pretense on the Federal Reserve, and I've made this comment before. I think the Federal Reserve is much more secretive than the CIA, and we don't even hardly know anything about what the CIA is up to. But even though I've been on the banking committee all these years, and I've always been on monetary policy subcommittee, and I am the ranking member there, I couldn't possibly get on the inside of one of those meetings where these decisions are being made. So this to me, this major step, and it is very, very bold. As a token effort, what I've decided this week to do is to reintroduce a bill that I've introduced in the past, but it's sort of languished. But I need to reintroduce it under these circumstances. And of course, we want to get rid of the central bank and all that, but they might pay more attention right now to the bill, and I'm sure you remember about it, and that is to audit the Fed, open up the Fed, find out what they're doing, and demand that there be some oversight. If the Congress created the Fed and we could get rid of the Fed, we at least ought to assume the responsibility of oversight of the Fed and not allow them to socialize America without Congress saying a single word. And Wall Street loves it. You hear people on the financial saying, well, what would have happened if we didn't do this? We need this help or there would be chaos. So they're going to give up the whole system of private ownership of corporations and allow the Fed to do this. It's pretty astounding.
Ron, you recently had an historic press conference. You brought together the anti-war presidential candidates, Chuck Baldwin of the Constitutional Party, Ralph Nader, Independent, and Cynthia McKinney of the Green Party. And I thought it was quite extraordinary. Of course, they all agreed with you on the war question. They're also good on civil liberties questions. But you got them to agree on opening up the Fed, some transparency about the central bank.
Yeah, and sort of what I've just said, they probably would sign on and endorse this whole idea of auditing the Fed. So I thought it was a great meeting, and the of course, they plus the Libertarian Party candidate all signed on the 4 principles, which the 2 other candidates disagreed entirely because they represent the establishment. But I think this was just great that they agreed on these issues. They've been pushed around. They're excluded from the system. They can't get in debates. You can't get on the ballots and all these problems. But I was very, very pleased that those who were considered far left, socialists, progressives, and liberals, Green parties, these type of people have been, willing to talk to us and work with us to try to bring about change. And I do believe in that. That doesn't mean I endorse it. As a matter of fact, Wolf Blitzer, just asked me point blank on TV, and I was sitting there beside Nader, would you support Ralph Nader and vote for him? I said, no, I wouldn't do that.
That was a great moment.
He wouldn't support me either. That doesn't mean we can't talk to each other and work in our coalition. But the reason why I love this is I am so confident that our message is so persuasive that I don't expect to convert Ralph Nader or Cynthia McKinney, but I know that we have people at our rallies. I used to be a liberal Democrat. I used to belong to the Green Party, and they come over because of the war and civil liberties, and all of a sudden they say, hey, maybe these economic liberties are pretty good. Some of our greatest hostility are by dedicated liberal Democrats who don't want any challenge whatsoever, and they're frightened with ideas, and they don't want to have anything to do with us because they see us as a threat that we might convert them. But I have to give Ralph Nader and Cynthia McKinney the credit of saying, well, they were confident enough that they're not feeling intimidated, and they want to have their issues stand on their merits, and challenging the establishment is a good idea, and the things that we agree on, we ought to work together. I mean, there's no monolith out there, and never will be, so why don't we pick out the important issues? And I just was very excited about that meeting, even with the one shortcoming of it. I still think that hopefully it'll make a long-term point.
Ron, you got them to agree as well on no more deficit spending.
Yeah, that to me, I was a little reluctant when I was talking to those coming from the left. I was, well, this one, I hope you don't have too much trouble with it. I was a little intimidated about it. I said, but I think it's morally wrong passing on this debt to the next generation. I said, well, I don't want to debate how you're going to do it, but we have to take a position of no debt, which left the door open. They wanted to make sure I wasn't dictating where you cut, what you do with taxes, or anything else. Just the principle of taking, borrowing money or inflating the currency for this. So this blended in with the Federal Reserve. You can't inflate for the debt. You can't borrow for the debt. You don't have it. You deal with it. You either cut the spending, find out where you cut it. But in general, the forum there hopefully would have gone along with what I had been talking through the whole campaign is it's a lot easier to cut the American empire overseas rather than cutting the first thing you cut is medical care for poor children. Why take that on? This is just political pragmatism. And so therefore, but the principle of a balanced budget and no more debt, I think, is a very, very encouraging sign that we could put a coalition together and stop this crazy deficit spending.
Ron Paul, there's a reason you're known as the hero of liberty, and we've heard some of it on this podcast. Take a look at Ron's archive on LewRockwell.com. Take also a look on the left-hand side of the page at the Ron Paul collection, all his books, all of which are very much worth reading. Ron, thanks for everything you're doing for our country, and if we've got a hope in Washington, it's in you, and thanks for your leadership in this very dark hour.
Thank you very much, Lew. Good to be with you.
You've been listening to The Lew Rockwell Show, produced by LewRockwell.com, the best-read libertarian website in the world. If you'd like to advertise on this podcast or on the website, email advertise@LewRockwell.com. And thanks for listening.